Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, it's morphin' time. We're going back to Power Rangers Rita's Rewind, which, hey, honestly, if you thought this game came out like 20, 30 years ago, you'd be forgiven. This game has all the nostalgia, from the scan lines to the art style. It's a work of art, man. But this game is kind of special because it does the same thing that Shredder's Revenge did for the game on the arcade cabinet here behind me in Turtles in Time. Turtles in Time rolls around, one of the best beat 'em ups ever, no big deal. Then all these years later, we get Shredder's Revenge, and it's that spiritual sequel. It has a lot of what made Turtles in Time great, but it tries to evolve a couple of those ideas, plus modernize the pixel art, all that good stuff. Now here we are after this game right here on the SNES in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. This is one of my favorite beat 'em ups growing up because you get to run around as the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, play as anyone you want, and it accomplished the same thing, for me at least, that Turtles in Time did. Play as these characters, beat up a ton of bad guys, and honestly, looking at the history of Power Rangers games, it's never really been that fantastic. I enjoyed the little tie-in show games, Time Force was okay, Lightspeed Rescue on PS1's all right. Really, I think the best modern Power Rangers game goes to this one right here in Battle for the Grid. And by the way, if you're going to buy this game, definitely get the Super Edition as the full game and all DLC on disc. But this is pretty much, if you're into like Marvel vs. Capcom, you can get this game, and it has like a full story mode, a ton of other modes on top of it, a decent sized roster. There's a lot going on in this game, but it took a while to get there because, again, they had to do a lot of add-on content and updates and support. But otherwise, Power Rangers games aren't as frequent, at least as they used to be during my childhood. So when I saw this really nostalgic one just roll around, I was really excited to check it out. Again, because it reminded me of this bad boy right here in Shredder's Revenge. And you bet when, no doubt, Limited Run comes around to do a physical copy for this game, I'll be picking it up, because I'm happy to say that Power Rangers Rita's Rewind, for the most part, is really good. It skips a beat here or there, which I'll get into, but all in all, if you're looking for like a really good nostalgia trip, co-op beat 'em up, sitting on the couch with a friend, this game is a great time. So with that, let's start breaking it down. If you're new here and you're into nostalgic, retrospective content, or the occasional day one review, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing. Starting off at the top here, the story is very simple. You have Rita, and then you have Robo Rita, and so pretty much you have the Power Rangers and Rita of the future, and Rita seems to have figured out how to take out the Power Rangers, so she sends stuff back in time to the current Power Rangers of like the 90s, kind of like when we grew up, so it's like we're traveling back in time with them. It's really cool in my opinion, and you're gonna fight against all the evil she's throwing your way as you make your way to both Ritas. And I will say, this game knows how to set the tone, because you know what? Hearing is believing, I always say in my reviews. Just listen to the first track in the game when you open up Mission 1. It's just, yeah, just listen. Dude, I heard that and I was ready to run through my wall. I was ready to fight anyone who dared challenge me. That track is insane to me. It is so good. And much of the score, if you will, is like that. It has that high energy, high octane, but Power Ranger spirit. This game has all the Power Ranger spirit. The goofy explosions, the craziness, the funny enemies. It's got it all. But also, I really appreciate, especially early on, the mission variety. So as you're going through, this is not just a beat 'em up, it's also a shmup, a shoot 'em up, right? Because as you're going through and you're kicking butt, and we'll break down that combat in a second, there'll be times you're riding around in your vehicle and you're shooting up enemies, and then you're going to do Megazord fights. So there's pretty much 3 tiers of the gameplay experience here. Now, I will say some tiers wear out their welcome as you get deeper into what is a very short game, under 4 hours. And that's including like, hey, there's a bonus mode, which is a speedrun mode, and there's a training mode if you want, and there's like one unlockable character. There is one sort of unlock, like as you're going through these beat 'em up levels, you're going to find mementos, but you're also going to find arcade parts, and there's a few little arcade machines that you can unlock. So again, really tapping into the nostalgia here, because there's times you'll go back to this place called Juice Bar, and when you're hanging out at the Juice Bar, you can talk to all of the characters in the game, which I think is really cool, just being able to hang out with them. But there are these arcade cabinets in the back, and you can play some wild ones. Like the first one, I don't want to ruin all of them for you because, you know, there's only so few in the game, but one of them is literally just like driving a car, blowing up holes in a road, and trying to avoid driving into the holes you just created while also luring cars into it. So you have to like speed up, but also slow down at times. And I was awful at it, but yeah, they have these sort of unlockables here packed in. The mementos you can look at, there's like 20 in the game. So there's not a crazy amount here, but yeah, there's just some little unlockables on the back end that may hold your interest for a little bit longer. So there's some stuff here, but keep in mind for like $35, you got to really love this style of game and be willing to run through it over and over and over again. But nonetheless, there is some good variety here that I think does kind of challenge for the throne a bit when it comes to Shredder's Revenge, right? Which I think to many people is like the best modern beat 'em up right next to like a Streets of Rage 4. So what does this game offer you? On the ground, you have really good beat 'em up combat, extremely sound. I think my only critique would be that the base movement speed doesn't feel good. I understand there's a dash mechanic, but just trying to walk to certain enemies, it felt progressively worse as I got deeper into the game. In particular, when I got to the Bones boss fight, the movement just didn't work with this boss fight, and it felt like I was getting cheapened by the game because I was so immobile compared to this enemy. But even when it was just cannon fodder coming my way, I still felt a little too slow, and I feel like that was not helping the game out. But otherwise, it's a pretty simple beat 'em up, very reminiscent again of Shredder's Revenge. You have your basic attack, but you can also chain it into a knockup. I do wish you could do air combos in this game. I think it would have helped so much in empowering the player, keeping combos alive, single targeting enemies, but instead you can do knockups, and then once you're in the air, then you go down for a ground pound. So it has its own rhythm in that way because you have to account for that. So pretty much when I knocked someone up, or when I went up to go after a flying enemy, I'd come straight back down into the group wherever that may be, and you can direct yourself. I like how mid combo you can change directions. There is also a little bit of like animation canceling, so you can like backdash, get out of the way, and then dive back into the fray. So there are some good defensive options. I've always admired when I've watched beat 'em ups online of people who are just like way better than I'll ever be at them, where they can go through and not get hit. Because I'm like, how do you do that without any defensive options whatsoever? I think it's just pure mastery on display. But in this game, they have good defensive options. So just like in Shredder's Revenge, you have this backdash. You can also use it aggressively, but I love how they convey to you visually and audibly when you hit that perfect dodge, because it does make a sort of hit impact sound, and you'll be leaning on this a lot. The game sends, as you'd expect in a beat 'em up, a ton of enemies your way, so you're going to want to use this thing to your advantage. A lot of boss fight mechanics, lean on it heavily, and when you combine that with some pretty decent enemy variety, like some flying enemies, some enemies who throw projectiles at you mid-combo, like they don't care, some enemies that throw big giant bombs your way, they don't care. How about enemies that are big and puffy and oh my gosh, they take a ton of hits. So it throws a lot your way, and you're going to be dodging a lot and have to make great use of it. And in fact, sometimes it's encouraged to dodge like 2, 3, maybe even 4 times in a row to kind of get your bearings. So the game does have a level of like skill where you're not going to go full aggro, but perhaps the defining mechanic when it comes to the combat is actually the rewind feature, if you will. So sometimes enemies will carry into the stage these time manipulation devices, and as you finish up these stages, you're going to see that you're going to be graded always on your time spent in the level, and if you want the highest rank, you want to get through the level quickly. So what does this time manipulation thing do? If it ends up getting dropped in the level and you don't hit it quick enough and destroy it quick enough, then guess what happens? It rewinds you back into some of the level while your timer keeps going. If you care about high scores and doing the best you can, this is where the little mastery itch starts to kick in a bit. But it's a cool little gimmick that the game doesn't overly lean on, but I think really helps separate it a bit. I've never played a beat 'em up that rewinds time, and you'll see like all the moves you were doing, all the enemies you beat, they'll come back. There was one time I was in a mission where I was riding a bike and trying to take out a bunch of enemies, and I died in the middle of that fight, and the rewind feature kicked in, and I had to re-die over and over and over until I just destroyed the time device with enough time. So the game can sometimes trap you in that, and I think that's the only pitfall when it comes to the actual timer and rewind feature there. But again, it kind of incentivizes that perfection that you look for in these sort of beat 'em ups. And that's what kind of brought me back, man. This was such a nostalgia trip because I was playing it on my PS5. That's where I got my key. Shout out to Digital Eclipse for it. But when I was playing it through, you know, right now they're doing this 30th anniversary celebration for PlayStation, and they gave out a bunch of free themes for the PlayStation 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you get all the sounds and everything. So naturally, I fire up the PS2 one, and all of those sounds are going off when I'm in the dashboard, and then I'm firing up this very nostalgic game. Like, it's awesome what an experience that was. But then you combine it with what they've done with the visuals. The art style is beautiful. Of course, I think it speaks for itself, but I think a lot of the heavy lifting actually comes from the filter that they put on the screen. So right upon firing it up, there's a few different scan lines you can do. You can also kind of bend the image your way and kind of give it that tube TV look if you want. Like, the game totally is targeting an audience that of course loves Power Rangers, but also like, hey, do you have nostalgia for that pure beat 'em up? Like, you remember firing up a TV like the one I have behind me here and playing a game like Rita's Rewind? They want you to have that experience, but in HD. They want it to be maybe little Johnny's first beat 'em up ever, right? Like, this is perfect for a kid. Hey, try out this beat 'em up and get them into that. Like, just like Shredder's Revenge was, it's the perfect game to hand a kid and kind of get them into combat games that are pretty forgiving. There's multiple difficulties. You have a very hard mode you can unlock after you beat the game on hard. I played it through on normal, and I have to say it was a pretty decent challenge as you went through. The first stage makes you feel really good. The second stage makes you feel really good. Like, everything's manageable, but the game does a really good job at scaling up as they introduce new mechanics. And by like episode 3, they really start to throw some tough battles your way, and you can feel that general difficulty progression that the best of the beat 'em ups have, right? Where as you get deeper, like I think of Turtles in Time, you get into the Technodrome, and suddenly this business gets crazy, right? It reminds me quite a lot of that experience. However, I did mention at the start of all of this that number one, there's multiple tiers of gameplay, but number two is that I don't think it handles all of that with grace. So I already mentioned some vehicle combat. We'll get into that. As you're driving around these levels, this is my least favorite part of the game because I think the difficulty, damage, and life balancing here is totally different from the rest of the game, and so it feels weird and just honestly not obeying the design that they laid out for the rest of the game. So, for example, if I'm running around a basic level and I fall into a ditch, just like any other beat 'em up, you come back to life and you're good to go. But for some reason, when you're driving around the vehicle levels, if you fall down, say, a cliff or something, or you jump and you misaim, you don't just spawn right away with a little bit less health like you'd expect, you just lose a life. Now, on the normal difficulty, they give you 10 continues, and it got decently close, but I felt I had it mostly managed, but most of my deaths came from this stretch of the game. I think it also combines with not the best controls. Again, it's going for that really old school feel in both gameplay and controls. By that, I mean that the beat 'em up part will feel familiar, but when you're aiming around with the reticle in these vehicle levels, what you'll notice is, oh, I only aim with the left D-pad, and I'm shooting with square in the case of PlayStation. Okay, where I think the more modern thing would have been to use the right analog stick and then shoot with the right trigger so that you could move and you can dodge in your vehicle. Like, it still has the same mechanics of like perfect dodging while you're in the vehicle, but this I just feel like was such a strange difference from the beat 'em up experience where it had all of the kind of old school tropes, but it had the ability to perfect dodge and multi-dodge and double jump and all these things that, and if I dare fall into a ditch, I don't lose a life, I just lose a touch of health. I feel like this game suddenly goes the other way when you're in the vehicles and turns into a shoot 'em up. To be fair though, when it comes to bullet hell anything, shoot 'em up anything, this is not my bread and butter, and I have to be very clear about that. I don't typically like this stuff in video games. Like, I think the best example I can give you is I love the story and the characters of Undertale, but when it comes to the gameplay and the bullet hell experience that's there, yeah, it's not my favorite, but I can tolerate it for a game like Undertale. And a game like Rita's Rewind, where I've seen a lot of this and it's very nostalgia driven, it can get a touch frustrating. Not the end of the world, but I think some people will really respect that you got a game here that tries to do beat 'em up and shoot 'em up. However, as these shoot 'em up levels kind of progress, you'll start to see a formula, which is like, okay, drive through, kill a bunch of enemies, get a couple of pickups, and then you'll have to take out a bunch of these crystals to take out a generator, and there's typically a boss fight at the end of it all. And because these sections, I think, I could be totally wrong, but based on what I was seeing with some of the assets on screen, how the camera was working. I think this is actually them hiding 3D, although it looks very 2D. I think it's actually hidden 3D. I'm not 100% sure on that, but because the game was, I imagine, made on a very tight budget, they had to reuse a lot of assets here, versus when you're scrolling around these stages that are the beat 'em up ones, they're wonderful. Everything from like a cemetery to a park to just like the rooftops. There's just a lot of awesome environments in this game, but when it comes to the shoot 'em up parts, I think that's where it stumbles a little bit, even artistically, and kind of gets in its own way, which is pretty crazy to be saying about a game that's, again, not very long. But the really cool part of this game are the Megazord fights. So you do this in a almost first-person perspective. Like, you see all of the Power Rangers are set up inside the Megazord, but you're seeing right through the window in the front. And it's a really cool system where you're dodging like left and right, and you're throwing punches as you're going in on these big enemies, and it's really cool. You'll build up your power sword, then charge that up and deliver this final killing blow. It feels awesome. I just love that you can bob and weave inside the Megazord. So really cool, really different. And that kind of combines for the entirety of the experience for Rita's Rewind. You know, it's very familiar. It's got some cool little pillars here that differentiate it from, say, something like Shredder's Revenge, which I've said in the past, I think you could argue it stays a little too closely in line with what Turtles in Time does, which I think you could safely assume was part of the initial design philosophy, is like, let's go out and build this and not compromise on it. But I think because of that, it feels just a touch, just a hair too familiar. Whereas if I was looking at this game here on SNES, and then I was looking at what Rita's Rewind offers, I think you can feel the evolution in the ideas and trying to do some different things, which ultimately I respect. Like I mentioned, once you run through the game, there's some unlocks, there's some stuff there for you to get, but it is a short game. You're talking like 3-4 hours on that first run. And this is a $30, $35 game, depending on what platform you're buying on, like PC, Steam. You're going to get it for a little bit cheaper. That's where I struggle a bit with this, because it's, as always with any review, always up to you. But in the case of Rita's Rewind, it's like, do you really value this heavily nostalgic experience? Do you love the Power Rangers? If so, no question, go out and get this. This is an awesome video game that really was a blast from the past for me. But when it comes to like those of you who are wanting to dip your toe in the pool, I do think like $30, $35 is really steep for how little you get in the terms of longevity. I am different from some reviewers where I try to balance my quality with my quantity when I talk about these sorts of things. For some people, it's like, hey, is this a high quality beat 'em up? The answer is yes, that's all they need to hear. And for those of you who need that sort of thumbs up to go ahead and go do that, you got it from me. Like, if you just care about quality, you're going to get quality here, even if I have some issues with the shoot 'em up sections. However, if you care about like, oh, I don't have a lot of money and I want to make sure if I spend that much money that I'm going to get a lot out of it, then Rita's Rewind, I mean, you'll have that moment like I had as a kid where I sat down for session 1 of this review, and in like an hour and a half, I went to the main menu and it was like 51% complete. I was like, damn, that kind of sucks. So yeah, it is a pretty tight game, but you can replay it. There's a lot of ways to engage with it. There's that speedrun mode. So if you care about that kind of arcadey vibe, you like that old school beat 'em up style, you'll find something here for you. But overall, I really enjoyed Rita's Rewind. The music, again, I just got a shout out, I think is awesome. It just really was a blast from the past with everything that's going on with the PlayStation anniversary, but also the scan lines, the dedication to that great art style. Everything here is just very much a blast to the past, and aptly named Rita's Rewind, because we're really retro rewinding here. But nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind. Let me know your thoughts on this game down below. Are you picking it up? Fire away. Other than that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you on the next Retro Rebound. Peace